Welcome to episode 320 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about the Switch 2 reveal-ish, Xbox rumors being debunked, a BioWare vet is leaving the studio, and much more. Before we get started, thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you are interested in supporting this show and all of my other content, check out the links in the show description. Subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app. Leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, and subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Gaming news. Let's get into the main story this week. The Nintendo Switch 2 has been revealed. Believe it or not, it's here. All the speculation's over. People with YouTube channels who have spent the last 6 years speculating about this, shutting their channels down. It's over, I guess. Not a big Nintendo fan, not going to pretend I am. This is worth talking about, though. I have a lot of thoughts, both good and bad, about this. But this is a big deal. Nintendo doesn't release hardware very often, and they're very iterative in the way they do it. And there's been a lot of mystery around this. There's been a lot of attention around this. For years, there were rumors about like a Switch Pro, over the last 8-9 years, where people thought like, maybe they would do a system that's a little bit faster, but it was essentially the same generation, a mid-gen refresh, you could say. And then they've kind of, I guess, surprised us by not doing that. Kind of. We'll talk more about that. But by doing a Switch 2, not the Super Switch. I saw people with all kinds of ideas about what it was going to be. It is the Switch 2. So basically, they released a 2-minute-ish video on YouTube and on all their social media that shows off all of the aesthetic features of the new Switch. There was no dialogue. There was no text telling you about any of the components or anything. Literally just showing off what I believe was a render. It wasn't even actual physical hardware, which is fine. It's probably accurate. Basically, it's a little bigger. The screen still has really thick bezels, which I found to be kind of interesting. The controllers have a new connection method. The old ones clicked in, and I guess people didn't like that because they weren't super stable. It wasn't a very the tolerances of that connection were loose, so it sounds like people didn't really like it too much. So the new one is supposedly magnetic and uses a little port that's coming out of the system that slides into a slot in the two controllers. I have thoughts about that. We'll get to it. They announced it's backwards compatible. That was a really interesting point that I saw all over social media. People being like, Nintendo puts the hammer down, or there was some kind of, I forget what the wording was, but it was like, it was a flex. That Nintendo flexes by saying that it's backwards compatible. Well, no, that's not a flex. That is the base minimum they could do. And we'll talk more about that as well after, the Digital Foundry just did their whole podcast talking about some of the stuff. And I thought some of their insights about those things were interesting. And then they showed 2 USB-C ports. So one on the bottom and the top now. There's also little details like there looks like there's quite a bit of like air ventilation in this. I assume due to the upgraded power of it. They also have downward firing speakers now out of the bottom if you're holding it obviously sideways, where the old Switch had rearward firing, which I would assume for most situations is going to be better for the downward firing ones. Still has a headphone jack, still is going to have the Switch SD card slot. Blows my mind that they're still doing the old school way of little little chips for their games, but I'm sure it's, there's going to be digital options as well, but never with discounts. Overall, and we'll get more into it, I'm surprised that there's no more gimmick. There is a button on the right controller that still isn't labeled, even in this render, that people are still speculating is going to be like their gimmick for this gen, but we don't know that yet. So, the larger hardware, it's cool, I guess. The old one still felt kind of big, but I think it's natural for it to get bigger, especially as it theoretically has more power. The controller connection thing is interesting because so the current Switch, the original Switch, the controllers like slide on and click in, right? This new one, it looks like they kind of insert in like you push them in like sideways. They don't slide on. And supposedly the rumor has been that there's like a magnetic connection, which in theory could be better if it's designed correctly. The issue is on the screen side of this connection, there's this little, I would say maybe it's an inch wide and extremely thin, obviously. It's a little port that it's what connects to the controllers. And on the controller side, there's a little slot opening where it slides in. Maybe this render wasn't perfect. Maybe the scaling was off or something. But this thing coming out of each side of the screen, it doesn't seem to protrude outside of. There's like a divot in the side for the controllers to slide into. But it still looks like it sticks out like a half inch or maybe more. Basically, with the idea of how these controllers are, that they come straight off and straight on instead of sliding. It looks like if you start to slide it off and bend it and turn the controller even a little bit, you're either going to break this connection or it's going to wear down over time and stop working. And for a console that at least in some capacity is targeted towards children, I can tell you for a fact, my daughter, her first tablet, we almost certainly believe she broke it because it had a micro USB, which is like one of the worst USB connections ever because they're so fragile. And when she would pull the charger out or even plug it in, she wasn't probably very gentle with it, especially as like a 2 or 3 year old. She's older now, so she's a little better with stuff to a point. But we're almost certain that her first tablet, it stopped charging. And we can only charge it if we bent the charger at a very specific angle. So obviously over time, her not pulling the cord straight out, but probably kind of pulling it sideways or whatever, being rough with it, caused it to stop working. And that's what I expect to happen here too. Her new tablet has a USB-C connection. So obviously that has a little bit less risk, but we've still had to tell her like, hey, you still need to pull it out straight and plug it in straight. Because if you bend it as you pull it out, it's going to break that charger eventually. And we won't get you another one. We probably would eventually, but don't tell her that. So part of the problem is that, say the connection was the opposite and the controllers had the little appendage sticking out and the console side, the screen side, just had the port. Well, if that breaks, still not ideal, not a great design still, but you just have to replace the controller. Now, if that piece breaks on either or both sides, you need to have your console fixed. Like, you can't just go to Walmart and buy a new set of controllers and pop them on, you're good. You're going to need a new console. So either you're going to have to hope that their warranty is super duper good, that you're still in warranty, that you're willing to be without the machine for, at least probably a couple weeks as you send it to them for repairs and back. If you're not under warranty, you're gonna have to pay for it, and that could be substantial. We'll see how friendly they are with allowing people to repair their own things. We now have Xbox just posted basically all of the parts to all of their controllers and all of their Series X and S consoles. You can replace all the parts in all of it now yourself. You can just buy the parts and do it yourself if you want. It's really cool. We'll see if Nintendo does that. I can't remember if it like iFixit or something, if they already have that with the Switch. I'd have to look it up. Please let me know in the comments. But I just question how that's going to work out in the long run. We'll have to wait and see. The actual controllers, there's the rumor is that the sticks are Hall effect sticks. If you don't know what that means, most current consoles and controllers in general use like an analog system for reading your control your thumbstick movements. Therefore, if they get dirty or worn out, that's when you get stick drift. Where like even if you aren't touching your controller, you'll still see that your controller is giving out an input because it's just getting old, it's worn out. The Hall effect sticks use magnets to read, so there's no parts to wear out because there's no connection. So in theory, they don't get stick drift. Supposedly, that's what is in the new Switch. That would make sense because they have probably lost millions and millions, probably not billions, but maybe of dollars replacing stick drift sticks in their Switch controllers. And even after they got, I believe, like a big lawsuit, and they had to, come up with a system to handle this, they never adjusted the design of their controllers, and it's still a problem to this day. So we'll see if they work on that. That will be an interesting thing to see. And then there's kind of the ongoing power questions. In a video that came out, a little while back, there was a lot of question about what kind of like basically power this is going to have. And when Digital Foundry, who I would say is the most respected kind of gaming tech analysts and stuff like that, they saw pictures of the motherboard that's going to be inside the system that showed how big the battery container is going to be, showed how big the CPU, or I think it's called an SoC, where it's the GPU and CPU in one. This is provided by NVIDIA, how big that is. And what they kind of gleamed is that it's I believe an 8 nanometer chip, which is like really old tech. Like modern phones use a 4 nanometer processor, and how big it is. And it's the smaller it gets, in theory, it's the more power you put onto a small package. It also gets a lot more efficient. So this 8 nanometer is like, I believe, like cars use like 10 nanometer chips because they're fairly low tech. They aren't really that fast. They don't have to be that efficient. But they're really super cheap to make. And same with these 10 nanometer or 8 nanometer chips, is apparently they're super, super cheap to make. But they aren't very good on battery. They're not very efficient. And they're not very fast. It's fairly old tech at this point. And their speculation then was they were a little concerned because on the motherboard pictures they saw, the battery location is pretty small, all things considered. And so what that means is that at least in undocked mode, they're probably gonna have to turn down the power quite a bit, which is going to reduce the capability of the machine quite a bit of what already may be fairly old tech. And well, they had no speculation that this is going to be like no upgrade. This is obviously going to be an upgrade to the original Switch, which itself was outdated when it released. They seem to be kind of paring back some of their expectations for how powerful this thing is going to be, at least undocked, but even docked to a point. To the point where, the speculation all this time and the rumors have been that the new Switch 2 is going to be like PS4 Pro power-ish. And they seem to be concerned that it may not even be like PS4 like OG powerful. And then that was backed up more this week when some supposed specs got leaked about the how fast the GPU, the megahertz or the gigahertz that it's running at, the GPU, CPU, and the RAM. And it was docked and undocked, the information they got. And when they were looking at it, it's a thing where I believe undocked the GPU is going to run at like half a gigahertz, or about 500 megahertz, and then docked it'd be about 1,000. And then the CPU was a little over 1,000 undocked and a little under 1,000 megahertz docked, which was interesting. Maybe the CPU just basically runs the same no matter what mode you're in, and it's the GPU that is the power savings. That can make sense. And then the RAM was something like 2,500 megahertz undocked, and then is something like 3,000 docked, which is like my new AM5 PC. I have 6,000 megahertz RAM in it. And, the 2500, 3000 is very much like 2 or 3, generation old CPU, what you would pair with those, which kind of comes back to this SoC potentially being fairly old and not very recent tech. The most interesting thing I thought that came from their conversation was that, at least in the extremely small amount of footage we've seen so far, and the complete lack of any kind of advertising for it, either on the machine, on the actual device, or what they briefly showed, is the Digital Foundry guys pointed out that we have the DLSS is purely speculation at this point. Nintendo has never claimed it's going to have DLSS. And just because they're using an NVIDIA chip, which they did previously on the current Switch, I believe, it doesn't mean it has DLSS. And even if it does, it could be as old as DLSS 2.0. It could be newer too. We just don't know. But they've pointed out that, it seems like so much of the conversation, so many of the people being like, oh, it's okay if it's not super powerful. It just needs to be, the DLSS will help, and it just needs to be good enough to run the games that people care about well. And like, I would say that there's at least some concern, at least in my opinion, that isn't going to be the case, that this thing isn't going to be powerful enough to run, hopefully at least their own games, which already have a pretty low bar for graphical fidelity. And the Switch obviously still struggles with their newer games because it's very old, very underpowered tech. But I would say that there's even a possibility that some of their new and even recent games aren't going to run like super well on this console, but we'll have to wait and see. But there's all this assumption that like DLSS is the key. But then there's always the possibility they aren't going to use DLSS. Like, Nintendo is notoriously kind of cheap. They don't do discounts. They, release hardware. They charge people for remakes of games that are, basically just ported over. And they're probably going to do that again as well, with this backwards compatibility thing. Don't think that they're just going to do a Game Pass or an Xbox thing where you just get all your old games. Like, you're probably going to pay for it. But there's a chance that they aren't going to pay the licensing for DLSS. They just don't see the point. Like, why would we? It's probably a lot of money. I bet NVIDIA charges a lot for that. So, yeah, I just think it's all very interesting. At the end of the day, I think the people who like Nintendo are going to love this thing. It's probably going to run all their games a little bit better. I'm curious if we'll end up finding out that this maybe on paper is more of a mid-gen refresh than a true next console generation for them. That's maybe me being too pessimistic. But I think at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter, because I'm probably going to buy one no matter what, because I'm curious. I have 20 years of Nintendo games to catch up on. I think my wife would enjoy it, and I know my daughter would have fun with it. So we're probably going to get one, even if it's kind of underwhelming. And a lot of the Nintendo fans are just going to buy one because they're Nintendo fans and they have kind of low expectations and requirements for what this needs to be. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm curious about is that, like, they're like easily going to sell 50 or 60 million of these things. What I'm curious about is what happens after that. Can they convince those other 30, 40, 50, 60 million people who bought Switches to get a Switch too? Like, is the argument that compelling? Now, that may depend on how quickly they go to completely next gen, like Switch 2 only games, and they leave the Switch behind. I suspect that their mainline titles may leave the Switch behind relatively quickly, but I also wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now, there's still third parties making games that work on both. That wouldn't surprise me even a little bit, because there's 130 million Switches out there. If you don't think that there's going to be third parties, especially, who still want to play to that audience, and get every penny out of it they can. I mean, there's a reason that, like, PlayStation 4, the adoption rate of PS5s are fairly low. There's still a ton of people playing on PlayStation 4, on Xbox One or One X or PS4 Pro. The adoption of the current gen of PS5 and the series consoles isn't really that great. Now, there's way more PS5s. I'm not going to get into the console war thing. That there's twice as many PS5s as series consoles, but even then, that's still quite a bit less than from the PS4 and Xbox One generation. So I'm curious how Nintendo handles all this. We don't have a release date yet. We do know that in April they're going to have their big showcase where they're going to probably talk about a lot more. Between now and then, I think third parties will start announcing games as well. And then they're doing like in-person events from April through June. And that's led my speculation to be that the Switch 2 will release in July of 2025. They have confirmed 2025. And I'd be surprised. I guess they could edge closer to the holidays. I'd be amazed if it releases any later than like September or October. I think once at that point, they're missing out on holiday sales, which is going to be humongous for this console. It's going to be insane. So I have no doubt that it's going to be a pretty big deal. Even if the people like me who are eternally online and paying attention to this stuff, I'm expecting to be kind of underwhelmed when these things get in people's hands and they start actually playing games on it. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot of what I've seen from like the diehard Nintendo fans doing a lot of like, yeah, I mean it could be better, but it's Nintendo. Like I suspect we're going to be seeing a lot of that, and we're going to be seeing a lot of people who aren't that loyal being like, okay, like this is fine, but it probably could be better. And I think that's where I stand is, and I hope I'm wrong, genuinely, because I'm going to be paying for one. But like, my whole thing is that the conversation is always, well, it's not going to be as powerful as the series, as Xbox or PlayStation. They're not trying to compete with them. And I understand that. The problem is that there's a chance that this hardware is going to come out and it's going to like, they should be trying to compete with like modern mid-level phones, because they can't compete with the top level phones of today power wise, because like the top of the line like Androids and iPhones are like $1,200. Like they're 3 times more than this console's probably going to cost, maybe 4 times more, or if not more. So I don't expect that, but I do expect it to be at least as powerful as like the decent phones of today when it comes to just a power perspective. And in a lot of ways it might not, the Switch 2 might not be, it might be pretty significantly behind that. And Nintendo doesn't have to do that. It's a choice they make. Now there were the rumors that there's a chance they've had this configuration, this hardware configuration set for years, literally, and they've just been sitting on it until the Switch no longer seemed viable enough to continue and they needed to put out a new product. They do that with games, and so it shouldn't surprise anyone if there's a possibility they've done that with hardware as well. With games, it's a little less noticeable, but I digress. So I'm curious how this plays out. Really, more than anything, I kind of don't care until there's hands-on with Digital Foundry and other people who do this kind of analysis. That's the next thing I'm curious about. I don't really care what games are announced for it. I don't really even care about their April showcase because they never reveal any details anyways. Their advertising is all fluff, which is fine. It's for the average person who doesn't care. So I'm really curious to see how that's gonna play out and what we're gonna find. With some other stories, we have Xbox was possibly being shuttered in 2021, or was it? And so this is kind of a messy story, but it started off earlier this week when a report by a website called The Information, I guess. I've never heard of this place. A particular games journalist claims that he thinks it's legit. Maybe conveniently, we'll get into that. But this article from The Information and analysis, I put in quotes, by noted PlayStation fanboy, liar, and console warrior, Nib95, there might be a little personal in there, was pushed by a bunch of various outlets and journalists this week by Paul Tassi and Forbes, and it noted that in 2021, Microsoft felt that they either needed to shutter Xbox or needed to pivot and invest heavily, which has led to multiple big acquisitions, namely ABK, Activision Blizzard King, as well as them opening up their games to more platforms, including competitors like Nintendo and PlayStation. So this obviously caught fire, went everywhere. For whatever reason, and Xbox is the whipping boy of especially the like influencer and games journalist kind of circles, where if they put out some good news, it gets some light coverage. And if something comes out, even if it seems pretty unofficial like this is, it's the biggest story of the week or the month. And that's a pattern that's been playing out for quite a while at this point. Again, kind of interesting, especially because later in the week, Insider Gaming, who is run by Tom Henderson, who I don't love because I think he does some shady stuff to get his stories. But he does tend to be pretty reliable with the info that he and his website puts out. They put up an article including commentary directly from Xbox, stating that the situation required more context. They denied entirely that in 2021 Xbox was ever under consideration for closure, and said that currently the Xbox currently has more customers and engagement than ever before in their history. One of the things, if you're in my Discord, you've seen me ranting about this, or even on my social media. I think one of the things that frustrated me the most about this was how multiple people, but I'm going to call out specifically Paul Tassi, at the beginning of the week when this, he quote tweeted or posted a screenshot of this Nib95 guy, who had themselves quote tweeted this or posted this The Information article. And it was interesting because he literally just said, something along the lines of, "Oh, this isn't great," or that doesn't seem good. Basically being like, "Oh, this must all be true, and this doesn't look good." Even though this Nib95 guy is extremely well known, and to the point where he's one of the people I have blocked in the like console war circles, the clickbait circles of literally just making things up. He's a big PlayStation fan, which is fine, but we don't maybe need to make things up and lie. But he's, been called out multiple times for just straight up lying about things. Obviously in this case, taking the article from this website I don't think anyone's ever heard of, and then molding it into a narrative that was really, really good for his favorite plastic box and bad for the other one. And it's one thing that he did that. That's expected. That's the reason I have him blocked, right? I don't need to see that stuff. I try to have news sources that are more reliable. And that kind of stuff gets posted every single day on all sides of the console war crap. I've blocked as many Xbox influencers as PlayStation. I can't stand any of it because it's all just dribble. There's no legitimacy to basically any of it, right? It's all just people farming clicks. My issue is that Forbes is a reputable media brand. And for whatever reason, Paul Tassi's like their main guy. And for Paul Tassi to share this, I assume without doing any of his own, because he doesn't really break stories. He just reacts to everything. He's essentially a content creator with with Word on his laptop, right? Which is fine. But even this, to that standard, is bad. And then for him to, a few days later, when Xbox responds officially and Insider Gaming has this article, Paul Tassi's reaction to that is to be skeptical about it and to criticize it. So no skepticism or criticism for the unknown website that posts this article at the beginning of the week that's critical of Xbox or potentially putting out information that isn't true. That's also, and he shares directly something from a influencer who is known to be dishonest and not be truthful. He posts that with no question, no skepticism, no questioning. But then when a more reputable website, an Insider Gaming, who's connected to a more reputable person, Tom Henderson, posts more information about this and official replies from Xbox, now Paul Tassi is suddenly skeptical. And this isn't necessarily to call him out specifically. I'm sure Paul's not a bad guy. He's even had opinions and takes stuff that I agree with rarely, but occasionally. My issue is that the bias and the agenda is just so clear here. And sure, he's doing this on his own personal account and he can do whatever he wants. But he does this in his Forbes articles as well. And those are taken seriously by people. And so it's less about Paul, but more about the fact that this thing, why not just treat them both the same? If you're going to be skeptical and critical of this, seemingly more reputable response to this information, then be just as skeptical and critical of the initial information instead of seemingly just being like, oh, this must be true because it fits the narrative I agree with or I want to be true or whatever it is. So this whole story is interesting. The weird thing is I even saw multiple people be like, well, this is definitely true. The shuttering in 2021. Even Microsoft said, and Phil Spencer said in 2021, that this was true. And my favorite thing was one of the people who I saw say that goes, but the article where that was posted is magically gone. It's because it wasn't real, because it never happened. There are articles from 2017, even before they started acquiring Xbox, where they had said something to that effect, that that was a time for them to decide, should we keep doing this, and if we are, we're going to have to invest big to stay competitive, or should we just shutter the brand? And that was a thing at the end of the Xbox One generation, before, probably when they were in the middle of developing the Xbox Series consoles. And that is a time where you would step back and say, okay, should we keep doing this? Do we have a viable road forward, or do we shut down? But then they purchased a bunch of studios like Naughty Dog, or not Naughty Dog, of course not Naughty Dog. Of course, I'm not gonna be able to remember off the top of my head. Was it maybe Compulsion and the studio who did Sinuous Saga, Ninja Theory? That's when they got some of them, and then they got Bethesda ZeniMax, and then more recently they got ABK, and there's been a few more kind of dabbled in there as well. This just it's a part of this pattern of every time Xbox announces this developer direct, which they are very good at these things. They're showcased in the summer, these Xbox directs, whenever they do some kind of big announcement that's outside of those things, they're good at this stuff. Whether or not you like their brand or their games or whatever, they do good shows and stuff, which is in contrast to, especially PlayStation tends to struggle with these things despite having a bunch of great IP and hardware. And every time something like this comes up, every time, next week is this developer direct that seems really exciting and is potentially going to have multiple really big announcements that we don't know about yet. We know 3 of the games they're going to talk about, but there's rumors now that there's 1 or 2 more games they're going to announce that are like a really, really big deal. And so there's excitement, there's good vibes, right? And every time that happens with Xbox, things like this pop up. And to the point where like I'm sure bits and pieces of that info are true or on some degree of truth, right? But not as a whole. And that's the point. That when these people, when these influencers or these kind of unknown websites or even known websites do this stuff, they always put in just enough like plausible info to make the stuff that they're just making up seem plausible, right? And that seems like what kind of happened here, and that's really frustrating. I think there's such a dereliction of duties by so much of game media and influencers, and I think journalists have a different level of expectation than just a YouTuber. Even though those 2 things are becoming closer and closer, and you could argue that the influencers have more influence than even journalists and stuff nowadays. Whole different conversation, but there should be some accountability. Or at least some intent to like just be truthful, and like even like me expecting someone like Paul Tassi to be unbiased. Humans struggle with that. Humans are bad at being unbiased, but there just has to be some attempt of neutrality, in my opinion. Like there has to be, like, you just can't make your agenda and your bias so blatant and then expect people to believe you later, except that in this case, even if you have a clear agenda and clear bias, there's enough people who don't care about that, who are like, yep, I agree with that agenda and bias, so I'm gonna roll with you and I'm gonna pump you up, even if I know deep down this is bad for everyone. But I don't know. I think that this is just another one of those things that I don't know how Xbox gets out from under this. We'll talk about something in a moment here that may help them a little bit, but we'll see. But this stuff is just frustrating for me. I'm an Xbox fan. I'm never going to deny that. I have my own agenda and bias for sure. But my issue, and the reason I always talk about these things, isn't because I'm trying to like defend Xbox, right? Like my issue is that there's plenty of things to criticize about Xbox, and I just want it to be done like accurately and fairly. Just as, and we're going to talk about PlayStation now. I wish that they were treated with uh, I feel like PlayStation gets treated with kid gloves a lot, and it gets a lot of their stuff kind of runs under the radar a little bit, where if the roles were reversed, and as we're about to talk about now, if Xbox had shut down 6 games and multiple studios that on this live service push, even though Xbox actually has a bunch of really successful live service games, um that story would be apocalyptic. But moving on to PlayStation, they've canceled 2 more live service games. This adds on to other ones that we know have been canceled. These ones was one was by Ben Studio, who previously made Days Gone. We don't know what that project was. The other one was by Bluepoint, who's done I believe like remakes and stuff of I think it was like Demon Souls, which like really highly regarded remakes and remasters and such. And they were doing a God of War live service spin-off game. Whatever. Uh this is another entry in this long series of stories we've been getting from PlayStation, where some of the previous leadership, who's now gone, 4, 5, 6 years ago, made this big push that, and just like every other publisher has, everyone wants Fortnite. Every single publisher wants a Fortnite. And the problem is there's only one Fortnite. And the reason is because it was kind of an accident. It was kind of an oopsie. The Fortnite as we know it today isn't what that game started off as. It started off as a base builder, like zombie game, where you would fight off waves of zombies in PvE. And then they put in a mode for PvP that was a battle royale. What we now know is a battle royale. And the middling PvE game literally disappeared. And Fortnite became one of the biggest things that's ever happened. Fortnite's like its own platform, you could argue, because it's not locked to any gaming platform. It's on tablets, it's on PC, it's on Xbox, Nintendo, PlayStation. It's on literally everything. And it's been so weird watching all these publishers really desperately try to capture that, even though even they couldn't capture it again. Like the Fortnite team couldn't do it again, because it was a thing about timing. It was a thing about luck. And it was a thing about probably a lot of really, really hard work. But like Epic can't recreate it. They've done a pretty good job, I think, of keeping it going, of being innovative and trying new things and making big moves. Not to mention that it's hard. A big part of the reason PlayStation or other companies probably can't recreate this live service success is it's easy to forget that Fortnite has become Epic's Unreal Engine showcase. It was the first game to get updated to Unreal Engine 5. It's the first game that gets a lot of the new tech as they upgrade Unreal Engine 5. And I'm sure when Unreal Engine 6 comes out one day, it's going to be the first one that gets Unreal Engine 6. And so we've seen multiple publishers try to recreate this and basically all fail miserably. We saw EA have some success with like Apex Legends. We've seen Activision have some success with Warzone, and before that was the Black Ops mode. But not to the same level as Fortnite. And it's been really strange that a publisher and platform in PlayStation that is like pretty conservative and pretty old school in the way they do things, where like they're still obsessed with console sales numbers, even if that metric may not really mean what it used to mean. And they, at least for a time, were really obsessed with just being iterative, just releasing the next Last of Us, the next Spider-Man game, the next, this, that, and the other, Uncharted, Killzone. For years, they just they had a bunch of really good IP, and they would just iterate on that. And then every now and then they would introduce new stuff like Ghost of Tsushima, and that would do really well too, because they have a bunch of really great studios that they're in charge of. And then, 4 or 5 years ago, they put in this initiative and they wanted to develop like 10 live service games. And supposedly that's even gone up, especially since the acquisition of Bungie, who has one of the greatest live service games in some ways in Destiny, and is working on another one on Marathon. But now in hindsight, and the way it's worked out in the last few years, The only game, they basically put out two of these live service games. One of them was Concord from a studio that they acquired, released Concord, shut it down a week later, and then disbanded the studio, potentially costing them hundreds of millions of dollars in both acquisition and development fees. And then Helldivers 2, which they paid a third-party studio to make and maintain. So it is good that they've had this one big success, because that's all it takes. The reason they're doing a dozen different live service games is because they really only need one to hit. If it hits like Fortnite. But like I said before, even as great as Helldivers 2 is, it's not Fortnite. And it's going to fall off a lot faster. It's not going to last forever. It's a cool game. I love Helldivers 2. I've had a good 40, 50 hours with it, and I'm sure I'll dabble here and there, but I'm not putting in the tens of thousands of hours that people are doing on Fortnite, and very few people will, because it's not the same. It doesn't have the same juice. On top of that, PlayStation's probably kind of annoyed that Helldivers 2 is the one that hit, because it's a third-party studio. So there's more expenses. They aren't making as much money off Helldivers 2 because it's made by a third-party studio as they would if it was made by one of their internal studios. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that Arrowhead has been approached for acquisition by Sony, but they may not want that. They may enjoy the idea of their next game being multi-platform, because now they have all this notoriety from Helldivers 2. So now people from all platforms are going to be excited about their next game. Why would they limit themselves to one or sell themselves off to one publisher if they don't need to? Maybe tides change, and maybe that happens. It wouldn't surprise me if it does, but it's, we'll have to wait and see. So we have this situation where two more of these games have been canceled. And I think the issue, and you are starting to see some disgruntled people, I think, in that PlayStation fan base, because, the PS5 released, they put out a couple games right off the bat, like God of War Ragnarok. You could argue those were more cross-gen games than they probably should have been cross-gen, and some of them were. And then it's been kind of quiet. They did God of War Ragnarok, and then they did Spider-Man 2, and I'm talking about first party, and then they had Astrobot. Helldivers 2 was made by third party. The Final Fantasy games are third party. A bunch of these Stellar Blade and these games, Wukong and stuff, have been third party exclusives. I said it. And now we don't even know what their next first party game is. Probably Ghost of Yotai. Maybe Insomniac's Wolverine game, but that's not guaranteed. And there's a chance, and I think one of the things that you're seeing a lot of frustration with more of these games getting canceled, is that Bend Studio could have been working on what PlayStation gamers want, some single player action adventure game, for the last multiple years. But instead they were doing this live service game that's now canceled. Bluepoint, especially, could have been working on a Bloodborne remake or something like that. But instead they were doing a God of War live service game. Like, who was asking for that? Even some of the biggest PlayStation fans I know, I've seen commentating like, we don't want that. We would love another God of War game from Santa Monica, but like, no, we're good. We don't need that. Like, and it's, the leadership that put this into motion is gone. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that as these games either all get canceled or some of them do get released, especially the Bungie Marathon title, that we'll probably see them pivot back to what they've done before. And I suspect that they're still going to try to fill their slate a bit more than, like Astrobot and Ratchet and Clank are great platformers. But then the rest of their really good games, or their respected games, are kind of the same thing. Third person action adventure sad dad games for the most part. I'm sure PlayStation would love to have a good shooter. People have wanted Guerrilla to be on, the next Killzone forever. Even though I think that would probably go to a different studio. Guerrilla seems like they are basically a Horizon studio at this point. And that's fine. But I'm really curious to, if we start to see some cracks in the armor of this like ultra dominant, ultra successful PlayStation brand, as people start to look around and they see, sure, maybe the Xbox first party games that release are mostly like 7 and 8 out of 10, but they have a lot of variety in genre. and they're generally liked and people are excited. And between 2024 and 25, Xbox is probably going to release more first party games than PlayStation has in quite a while. They potentially could have more new PlayStation 5 games than PlayStation will this year, by putting Indiana Jones on there, by putting Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2 on there, by putting the Doom game on there, by putting, there's a decent chance they're going to release more first party games on PlayStation this year than PlayStation will, at least AAA, sized. And that's, as much as people are ripping on Xbox about doing the strategy, to a point that starts to kind of look bad on PlayStation, at least to me. And I've seen people say things like, oh yeah, give us all, PlayStation fans be like, oh yeah, give us all your games. And I'm sitting here like, yeah, man, pay $70 for that game. You're subsidizing my Game Pass, and I am totally cool with that. Like, that doesn't change my life at all. Whether I have Game Pass on my Xbox or on my PC, which I have both, play them, man. I want people to play Hellblade 2. That game's amazing. I want to see Hellblade 2 get reviewed on PlayStation without the tax that it definitely got on Xbox, and see people finally give it the credit it's due. Same with Starfield. Same with, all these other games that are eventually probably going to go over there. I just, we're in a weird spot right now in the gaming industry, and I think it's interesting. We could see some of these fortunes change this year. There's a rumor of a February 2025 state of play from PlayStation. I don't think I'm being biased or anything to say that those state of plays are often kind of disappointing. I feel like every time we go into them and all the PlayStation fans are like, oh, I hope we see this and this and this and this. And we don't see any of those things, or maybe we see like one of them and it's a little underwhelming. PlayStation has really good IP. They have really good studios. They have really good third-party relationships, but they don't do the media side great. And at the end of the day, they're selling twice as many consoles, so I doubt they care. But, I would just temper expectations about a state of play, turning everything around. But yeah, I'm curious. I think even more so than gamers, I'm curious if we see the news coverage of this stuff ever feel more even. Because like I said before, if Xbox was going through these same issues with an initiative they had, and it was failing this miserably, which I think we would say the live service push has been a failure so far for PlayStation, I just feel like the narrative would be very different and the focus would be very different than it is. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm too biased. Maybe I'm just an Xbot with my green hoodie and my green light right there. I don't know. You can tell me in the comments. Moving on over to another rumor, / leak or whatever. Corinne Bush is leaving BioWare after 18 years, and there are Edmonton BioWare studio closure rumors. So I didn't see anything about this, and I tend to have my finger on the pulse of this stuff. And then pretty quickly I realized why I didn't hear about these rumors before they got bigger. So Jeff Grubb of Giant Bomb confirmed that rumors that Corinne Bush, who was the director of Dragon Age The Veilguard, is leaving the studio. As of the time of recording, I'm recording this around noon on Friday. I've still, I actually interact with Corinne fairly often, not too personally. I definitely haven't asked her about this. She hasn't said this yet. Grubb has a lot of connections in BioWare and EA, and there is an email floating around that is supposedly from her to her Dragon Age team at BioWare, saying that she's leaving. But she hasn't revealed this yet, so keep that in mind. But that seems like it's likely true. The weird part about this is that Jeff Grubb kind of, he disputed rumors that the Edmonton studio, which is like the main BioWare studio, is closing along with this. And this was really weird to me because when I searched for, before I knew everything that was going on, I started searching around like, hey, where are these rumors coming? Like, what rumors is he talking about? And I found multiple people talking about Corinne leaving BioWare, but I didn't see anything about this Edmonton rumor. And then I found out that Jeff Grubb must pay attention and felt the need to platform rumors from one of the big anti-woke grifter influencers that goes by Smash JT. Just so you know who this person is, there's someone who runs a website that tracks all of the devs who have said woke or progressive things, developers who have done that, or who have developed games that they consider woke or DEI or whatever their word of the week is. It's a website literally meant to help people harass game developers. And he's being sued by one of them, Marquette. I forget what her first name is, but she's been, like more of a gaming commentator for a long time. She was on like G4 and other places, and he's being sued by them. So this is frustrating because especially Smash JT, Grums, a bunch of the Hypnotic, these dudes literally just make shit up. And it's what I kind of said before, where about the rumors from that Nib guy and that the information website, is what they'll do is they'll take things that are either true or there's some elements that are true. So like in this case, taking a rumor about Corinne leaving BioWare, and then they'll add more onto it that they've just made up because they know their audience and they know what's going to get them all riled up and frothed up and happy, right? So in this case, he talked about Corinne leaving. I assume he misgendered her and said a bunch of awful things about her, like I'm sure he has for years at this point. And then threw in like, oh, and by the way, I also heard that Edmonton's closing, which would mean that BioWare's shutting down, if that was true. Jeff Grubb disputes that, says that he's seen or heard nothing that indicates that. And it kind of doesn't make sense. Because despite what these people push and want everyone to believe, and unfortunately, if you look in the gaming circles, a lot of people do believe it, Dragon Age the Veilguard reviewed really well. The indications are right now that it sold at least decently, well enough. Probably didn't sell 20 million copies. Hopefully we're looking at 5-6 million at least, maybe even more. That'd be great. And they're just, and if anything, the next game, which should be Mass Effect for them, is one that's probably going to have a lot more appeal to more people, at least in the modern audience, right? The other part of this is Corinne leaving doesn't indicate that there's problems at BioWare. She's been there 18 years. And that it's normal for devs to leave after their projects are done, especially people in leadership, especially when BioWare is going from essentially developing 2 games at once at any given time, which they've kind of always done. They got rid of the Star Wars team in the game that's now being managed under a different publisher. Dragon Age the Veilguard is out and there's no DLC or expansions coming to it. That means the next game is going to be Mass Effect. And instead of having 2 teams working simultaneously, the rumor has been, and it seems true, that the whole studio is going to be on 1 game at a time now. So what that means is the leadership from Dragon Age the Veilguard, well, the positions they were in are filled. Corinne's position is Mike Gamble's position. And, they're not going to kick Mike Gamble out for Corinne. So it was more than likely that if she stayed at BioWare, and this is probably true for other directors, and we may see some of them leave as well, but there's a chance that Corinne was going to have to take like a lesser role. And, she's been there almost 20 years. She'll be in demand simply from her experience in the game dev world, especially at BioWare. She might just want to try something different. You may see her pop up at an indie studio or a brand new studio. You may see her pop up over Archetype on Exodus or something. We'll have to wait and see. But it's not weird that Corinne's leaving. And sounds like the Veilguard development was kind of a nightmare. The reaction by people, especially to her, because of her identity, was probably extra awful. So you can't blame her for wanting to try something else. So as much as this is getting pushed, and I think it sucks that Jeff Grubb basically platformed Smash JT and his crap, it just doesn't seem like it holds much water. I also hate this because this should have been, like, Corinne should have been allowed to announce this on her own. It's Friday. This is when a lot of devs will announce that this kind of thing is happening. She gave her team a heads up a few days ago, and she was probably waiting until today to tell everyone, hey, by the way, I'm heading out. I'm leaving BioWare. I love it here. I'm excited for what they do next as a fan, but I'm going to be trying other ventures. And that got taken away from her. And then it's also been turned, don't you dare search her name on social media, especially Twitter, because it's a nightmare of just people being really awful. And I think for getting clicks, this was something that Jeff Grubb and others were willing to kind of take away from her for their own benefit. And I think that sucks. Okay, hitting a few smaller stories before we wrap up here. New Halo game could be announced in 2025. There's a bunch of rumors swirling around. This would make sense. In 2024, they announced their studio change, the name from 343 to Halo Studios. They announced that they're switching from using their own Slipspace engine, I think it was called, to Unreal Engine 5. And they showed off some kind of like super early renders of stuff. They've probably been doing this since Infinite came out. There's a really good chance that whatever their next game is probably in the like mid to late production stages. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's ready for 2026. This goes along with the recent rumors that Xbox could release their next generation of hardware as soon as 2026, and having a Halo game as one of your launch games makes more sense than anything in the world that Xbox could do. If you remember, Halo Infinite was supposed to be a launch game, but reaction to the graphics and sounds like some other development issues caused it to be delayed, and it didn't come out for a few months, or I think like a year later, basically. So this wouldn't surprise me at all. I think this would be cool. I love Halo. I loved Infinite. I thought Infinite was really great. The single player, I did some of the multiplayer, realized I'm older than I was when I was really good at it, but still had lots of fun with it. And I always intend to go check it out again. I stay busy with other stuff. So hearing about either at probably the summer showcase is what I would guess, the Xbox showcase in June, I wouldn't be surprised at all if we at least get a teaser about what the next game is. There's lots of speculation that it could be Halo 6, I guess, whatever it would be. It could be a remake of the original game of Combat Evolved, and that they could potentially kind of reboot the series and start from one again. That could be cool because I kind of don't love where they went with the story, especially in 4 and 5. But we'll have to wait and see what they do. But I'm excited about it. In the ongoing Ubisoft saga, they are considering letting Tencent have some of their IP for a new venture, a new studio or publisher, while the Guillemot family retains control of Ubisoft and runs what they retain. This is just such a mess, man. Like, if you've ever wondered how inept and how selfish and greedy the Guillemot family is, just see how this is being handled. Like, either they recognize that they're just in over their heads and they can't do this anymore, and they should just let someone else take the reins, even if they hire them themselves, right? Or sell it off to PlayStation or EA or Ubisoft or Embracer, for God's sakes, or to begrudgingly Tencent or one of these NetEase or whatever. But instead, the way they're handling this, where they like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, they want to keep control, but they don't want to have financial responsibility. Like, it's so frustrating. And the people I feel the worst for are the studios and the developers under their umbrella, because it's been pretty clear for like 15 years that the leadership of Ubisoft is completely inept, has no idea what they're doing, is completely out of touch with the gaming industry, and they just keep plodding along, while they have studios and especially developers who are extremely talented and try to make the best of what they can, even though the leadership, the people at the helm, can't even tie their own shoes. Like, it's very frustrating. I want a Division 3 so bad, and every day I'm terrified. The people at Ubisoft Massive who make the Division seem very confident that no matter what happens with Ubisoft, that they're good, that Division 3 is going to come out. Like, and that would make sense. Even if they get sold off, the Division 3 is probably the next big game I would assume the most people would be excited for. Maybe that Splinter Cell remake, but even that seems in question. Maybe the next Far Cry, maybe whatever they're going to do with Siege, or Rainbow Six one day. I still think that the Division 3 probably has the greatest appeal of anything they have coming up, even if it probably hasn't even entered production yet. So we'll see what happens. It seems like any day we could just find out that some crazy thing has happened with Ubisoft, and I guess we'll deal with the fallout then. Then the final story here, Larian, the makers of Baldur's Gate 3, celebrated 100 million mod downloads by adding the, quote, Wither's Big Naturals mod to consoles. This is a mod where the demigod god companion that's at your home base and does a bunch of stuff for you, gives him big old knockers, gives him some big old titties. So if that's what you've been waiting, this is on console. I guess the mod hasn't been there previously. So if you want to give Skelly Man some big old naturals, you're in luck. As for some content updates, I have an ongoing Mass Effect playthrough. I'm currently on Mass Effect 2, Legendary Edition, heavily modified. On my Twitch channel, I've got 2 parts already. I do have VODs loaded up on YouTube. I just haven't released them yet. So if you want to catch the VODs, check them out on my YouTube. But if you want, I tend to stream in the middle of the day on the weekdays, sometimes on the weekends, and I'll play a couple hours of Mass Effect. I'm really enjoying this playthrough. Mass Effect 2 is actually my least favorite of the trilogy, even though I still really, really like it. But the modded experience is definitely pretty nice, and definitely makes me like it more than the vanilla version for various reasons. So go ahead, check that out. And I'll keep tinkering with the podcast and other parts of my content to try to optimize both my workload, because I do this for fun and a relatively busy life. But I try to take it seriously still, and just the way I market and release content to try to make that sustainable so I don't go crazy. So if you see stuff that you like that I'm doing different, please let me know. It helps me reinforce that. If you want, if you have ideas or your own suggestions, I'm very open to it. So that's it for content updates. That's where I'm going to start to wrap this episode up. If you have your own topics, questions, or feedback, be sure to let me know in my Discord or hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. Become part of the conversation by joining my Discord to chat with our little community, or by leaving comments in YouTube or on Spotify episodes. For the Discord, check out the Linktree link in the description of this video or podcast, and you will find the Discord link in there. I would very happily welcome some new voices to come in and chat. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.